After a college basketball season unlike any other for the SEC, the conference's chances at producing a national champion come down to two teams. It's Auburn and Florida in a Final Four that includes Duke and Houston. Been a good tournament for the SEC so far. Now, can they finish and deliver a national champion for the first time since 2012 Kentucky? Welcome into our basketball-themed edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, a podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. We've been talking hoops the last couple weeks with the SEC taking over March Madness. We're going to wrap that up this week before getting back into football matters next week. But we can't leave the hoops now, John, because after this spectacular season for the SEC, they put 7 teams into the Sweet 16, 4 into the Elite 8, and 2 into the Final Four. So without seeing the final verdict here, we offered our grades, our marks last week entering the Sweet 16. Now I want a report card update entering the Final Four. How would you grade the SEC's tournament?
I'd give it an A. I think you put 2 teams in the Final Four. You've gone above and beyond. Also, I think it's important to point out that we aren't abandoning our headline, football altogether, the name of our podcast, because there's been a lot of contact in some of these games. I think, I'm astounded sometimes when I see some going for a rebound and somebody crawls up somebody else's back and knocks them over the baseline and no foul, incidental contact. Play on, guys. It's been a rough tournament, a good one and a rough one.
It hasn't been a good one. We've talked about this before. The fact that this tournament hasn't featured a lot of upsets. We thought that would result in a really good Sweet 16, Elite 8. I thought the Sweet 16 / Elite 8 was a bit of a mixed bag. There was a few thrillers, particularly I thought in the Sweet 16, and then in the Elite 8, one really good game with Florida and Texas Tech. But overall, the Elite 8, the top seeds took care of business pretty handily with Houston, Duke, and Auburn advancing without much issue. Really, the Florida Texas Tech game was sort of the crown jewel of the Elite 8, and like I said, there were some good Sweet 16 games mixed in as well. One involving an SEC team, Texas Tech surviving Arkansas in overtime. Arkansas blowing a 16-point lead. So, your assessment of the tournament overall on a scale from snoozer to most compelling?
Well, I would, to me, it's closer to most compelling. And the reason I say that, I know this is supposed to be all about upsets, but I just think the caliber of play has been pretty good. And I've seen some really good players because going into the tournament, my knowledge of college basketball is pretty much limited to the SEC. I just didn't watch that much. Uh, Along the way in this tournament, there were some teams I really like. One you brought up, Texas Tech. I really like watching that team play. That's a really good team. It easily could have made the Final Four, I thought. It gave Florida all it would want, all it could want. Uh, so I'm impressed with the level of play in this tournament. Yeah, there's been a lot of contact, but there's also been some really good basketball stuff going on in terms of shooting, passing, and that sort of stuff. I've enjoyed this NCAA tournament more than any I can remember in a while, actually.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, I guess I'd call it fair to Midland on
Uh-huh.
the entertainment value. I thought the Sweet 16 was really good. The first couple rounds, I like seeing the upsets. We didn't have many of them this year, and so I thought, okay, we're going to have an epic Sweet 16 and Elite 8. Well, I thought the Sweet 16 was maybe not epic, but pretty darn good. The Duke Arizona game was good. Texas Tech with the comeback over Arkansas in a great game there. The next night, Houston won off that brilliant inbounds play that Kelvin Sampson drew up to beat Purdue. Michigan State held off Ole Miss in a close game. Like I thought the Sweet 16 was good. I thought the Elite Eight was a letdown. The Florida Texas Tech game was good, but I mean, let's face it, Duke curb stomped Alabama. Houston curb stomped Tennessee. Those games were not compelling, and the Auburn Michigan State game I didn't think was as close as the final score indicated. So I thought the Elite Eight left a little something to be desired, and we'll see what happens in the Final Four. You know, the last time we had 4 1 seeds in the Final Four was the only other time. It was 2008. And if you read the press clippings, you probably contributed to some of those, John. If you read the press clippings from back in 2008, I mean, all the pundits were expecting this truly phenomenal Final Four of 4 1 seeds. It had 3 blue bloods in that Final Four: UCLA, North Carolina, Kansas. Memphis was sort of the outsider, but I mean, they had a great team under John Calipari that year. Chris Douglas Roberts and Derrick Rose. And the semifinals kind of failed to deliver, frankly. Memphis stomped UCLA. Kansas took care of North Carolina without much issue. But then at least there was a great national championship game. Kansas survived Michigan in overtime. So the semifinals sort of underwhelmed. The national championship delivered. I guess, you know, there's not much history for a guide there, but the only thing I would say is, like, just because we have all 4 1 seeds in the Final Four doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're going to get 3 great matchups here as it unfolds this weekend. But I am really looking forward to it. Like, these are the 4 best teams in college basketball. I thought they'd proven that going into Selection Sunday, and they've reiterated it throughout the tournament. And it is, I think, a treat and a rarity in college basketball that, as great as this tournament is, one thing we don't often get is the 4 best teams at the end. And so I am kind of looking forward to that, even though, like I said, I'd give sort of a C plus ranking maybe for the tournament so far. I am pretty interested in by this reality that we're getting the 4 best teams in San Antonio.
You know, and you were mentioning that and looking forward to a big Final Four. One of the most intriguing Final Fours I covered, I'm really dating myself, was in 1983. And that came down to NC State hitting a shot at the end to upset Houston of Phi Slamma Jamma fame. But going into the Final Four, the expectations were so high for this great matchup between Louisville and Houston, 2 teams just loaded with future NBA players. And they had a great game. And then that kind of stole the thunder. The final game was close, but NC State was a Cinderella story. And what that reminds me of, you really never know what you're going to get from this tournament. And even though you say, okay, it doesn't look like a mismatch, you would think any one of these 4 teams could hold its own in this foursome, that there shouldn't be a blowout. But I'm almost always wrong about NCAA tournaments. I mean, last year, I didn't think there was any way UConn could win back-to-back national titles. I thought it had lost too much from its first national championship team. I think the field is too balanced to win that many games in a row twice. Yet UConn was dominant and established itself as a rarity, back-to-back national champion. I look at this Duke team now, and I only saw it once during the regular season. I'm kind of looking at Duke as a great team. And if there's one team that might separate itself from this 4-team field, to me, it could be Duke. That it might have a higher upside than the other teams. I hope I'm wrong about that, because I would like to see 3 very close last-minute games decided. That would be ideal. But to me, Duke is the outlier, because watching it in this tournament, I think it's better than I realized it was.
They've been the most dominant number 1 seed, that's for sure. I mean, the other number 1 seeds have survived games where they haven't looked at their best, and that's fine. A lot of national champions have to do that a game or two en route to the title, but Duke hasn't. They've been dominant up to this point. John, you mentioned the phrase I'm almost always wrong earlier. I'm wondering, have any readers ever suggested that as maybe like a tagline for your columns or anything? John
I
Adams, I'm almost always wrong. Is there any, you have any fun with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, they add a little to that theme. It's usually, God, you're such a moron,
Mm, they
you
embellish it
know?
a little bit.
Yeah, they really lower my intellect over the course of the email. Yeah, I'm not just wrong, I'm a blithering idiot
Hmm.
and really don't deserve to be out in public, much less having my opinions published, but life isn't fair, is it?
No, no, it is not. Looking at the Final Four, John, the SEC teams are on one side of the bracket, so you're only going to have one SEC team in the national championship, guaranteed of one, but max of one. Auburn and Florida will be playing in the semifinals. Who at this point is the SEC's best shot at a champion? In other words, if you're Greg Sankey and you want to end this drought without a national championship that extends back to the 2012 Kentucky team, that was the last SEC team to win it all. If you're wanting to end this drought, who do you want to see win this semifinal? You want Auburn to win? You think you got a better shot with Auburn? You want Florida to win?
Well, I've kind of gone with Florida all the way through this tournament, so I would say Florida. One thing about Florida, I don't feel it's played its best game yet in the tournament. Uh, really showed its toughness, willpower, coming back against a really good Texas Tech team. Showed as much moxie in that comeback win over UConn. Two comeback wins against good teams, very good teams. And I thought in each case, Florida's about to go down. It rallied, it showed an extra gear I wasn't sure it had and showed extra toughness. And it's got, and Walter Clayton, a guy that's playing as well as anybody in the tournament. So I tend to lean toward Florida. One thing I've noticed in this tournament, some teams have maybe picked the wrong time to play their best game. Alabama in the Sweet 16 when it hit 25 threes. Now, I know Duke is a better team, but you can't shut down somebody on the perimeter when it's making 20 to 25-foot threes, as Alabama was in the Sweet 16. So if Alabama could have had similar shooting in that game, I think an upset wasn't out of the question. So I thought Alabama maybe picked the wrong game to attain incredible, historic, really, 3-point shooting.
Hmm.
So I look at Florida as maybe hasn't played its best game and that it would match up better against Duke than Auburn would. But I was wrong about Auburn. I thought Auburn was running out of steam. And I thought Janai Broome was running out of steam when I saw the player and the team in the SEC tournament. Not so. They really have been good in the tournament, and Broome's been great. So they've got the size that could trouble Duke as well. So I think if no matter who wins that game, the SEC can't throw up its hand and say, well, we got no shot against Duke. It does have a shot.
And that's if it even is Duke.
If it is, yeah.
Yeah, I think Duke is they're the clear front runner. They're the deserving front runner. Maybe not clear, but the deserving front runner at the very least. I just got an email in my inbox, John, with the updated odds for the Mop Award. First of all, I mean, what an embarrassing name for an award that is. Like, you win this great honor, and you just say, I won the Mop. That's kind of a strange thing to me, but yeah, that's what they call it, the most outstanding player. I guess they want to call it the most valuable player. So it's the tournament Mop Award. Cooper Flagg is the odds maker favorite to win that award. Makes sense. He's had a great tournament for Duke. Duke's the front runner to win the crown. But there at number 2 is Walter Clayton, and that's why I agree with you that Florida is the SEC's best chance to produce a champion here. As good as Broome was in that Elite Eight win against Michigan State, and he was back to his old self there, but I do think that this tournament, by and large, and the Final Four included, I like teams with veteran guards who sort of rise to the moment. And that's what we've seen from Walter Clayton. I mean, he is like the epitome of what I like in March Madness. And I'm not just saying personal preference, but teams that I like in March Madness have veteran guards who rise to the moment. And we keep seeing Walter Clayton do that time and time and time again. I think Duke's a little bit of a better team, not much, but a little bit maybe at their best better. But man, when you're seeing the way Clayton plays, and he's got a good supporting cast too. It's not a one-man show, but he's been phenomenal in this tournament and was in delivering that win down the stretch against Texas Tech. He makes them, I think, the SEC's best chance. On the other side of the bracket, John, I picked before this tournament tipped Houston beating Florida in the championship. And maybe I'm just being stubborn here. I think it's possible. It's been known to happen on this podcast. But I'm not fading Houston now. I get why Duke is the odds maker favorite. They should be the odds maker favorite. But again, I go back to I have a hard time resisting those teams with veteran guards in this tournament. And Houston's just loaded with veteran, gritty players that just keep delivering time and again, whether it be Emmanuel Sharp, LJ Cryer, I mean, up and down the lineup. Experienced guys who've played and won in this tournament before. They had to survive some tough games. Then they played their best game of the tournament and whipping Tennessee. And so I'm sticking with my guns. I'm picking a Houston over Duke upset. And then if it would be Houston, Florida, I think I could see that going either way. But I'm sticking with my pick of Houston over Florida.
Blake, don't you think the officiating could play could be a big factor in this? I mean, we've talked about we don't say any one of these four teams has no chance, and you've kind of picked an underdog in Houston. I really think the more contact you allow, the more it could favor Houston
Mm-hmm.
and maybe Auburn.
I certainly think so with Houston. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen Auburn get in foul trouble. It has to keep Janai Broome out of foul trouble, and sometimes he makes some silly fouls. Um, but I think with Houston, it's just I know it's going into that game thinking we're gonna push Duke out of its comfort zone, and we're gonna make it play through contact. Those are famous words in the SEC this year. Everybody seemed to have to play through contact because a lot was allowed. And I've seen it go both ways in this tournament. I've seen some games where I thought it was called pretty tightly, in other games where there was a lot of allowed. I think if Houston can have a lot of contact and play defense the way it really wants to play it and try and be very physical with Duke, it has a shot. I'm not saying that Duke can't handle physicality. It can, but the more allowed, I think, the better for Duke's opponent.
I agree. And maybe to your point on Auburn, um, you don't want Broome getting in foul trouble. So I think to that end, maybe a more physical game, refs being a little light with the whistle. To your point, that might favor Auburn too, because I don't think you want to try to take down Florida with Broome battling foul trouble. He's already battling injury. He came back in the second half of that win against Michigan State after going out with an injury. Bruce Pearl has said in media reports that he expects Broome to play. I don't see why he wouldn't, considering he came back in that Michigan State game. But Auburn needs a healthy, effective Broome who's not in foul trouble. I think if they are to beat Florida in the semifinals. John, we can get back to the Final Four at the close here, but I want to spend a moment on the Elite Eight and the SEC teams that lost those games. And in the case of Alabama, I think Nate Oates is spared too much criticism there because he was just in the Final Four last season with Alabama, took Alabama as a 4 seed to the Final Four last year, and then running into Duke, the team that's playing as well as anybody in this tournament. That almost felt like an inevitable result, Alabama losing to Duke in the Elite Eight, although I thought the game would be closer. On the other side, you have Tennessee bowing out in the Elite Eight for the second straight year. Got whipped by Houston. I mean, Houston crushed them from wire to wire in that game. Tennessee shot it horribly from 3-point range. So this is now the third time for the program reaching the Elite Eight. The program still has never gotten to a Final Four. Two of those Elite Eight appearances come under Rick Barnes in the last 2 years. For me, John, this felt like an inevitable result. I know a lot of people didn't see it that way. And really, as I looked at the matchups, maybe it didn't feel like inevitable. But as you look through the lens of it, Rick Barnes just does not beat teams that are seeded better than him in the NCAA tournament. Like that's not hyperbole. He truly doesn't do it. Only one time in his entire career has he beat a team seeded better than him in the NCAA tournament. That comes all the way back in 2002. So 23 years ago at Texas. Texas was a 6 seed. They had one upset en route to the Sweet 16 that year. They beat a 3 seed. Otherwise, Rick Barnes has never beat a team seeded better than him. So when it was 2 versus 1, through the historical lens, it felt inevitable. Rick Barnes does a lot of great things. I've written he would be on my Mount Rushmore of active coaches without a national championship. I have Rick Barnes, Mark Few, Kelvin Sampson, and Bruce Pearl on that list. But when it comes to the tournament, if Tennessee is seeded 2, 3, or 4, they're probably going to play a team at some point that's seeded better than them, and they just can't beat those teams. What do you make of that? And do you see a future in which that could change?
That's a huge body of work. I mean, if that were over the course of 6 seasons, 9 or 10 seasons, and say, well, law of averages, he'll upset somebody.
Yeah.
But got to go back to 2002 and keep in mind, he's an NCAA tournament regular pretty much. Wherever he's been, he knows how to get a team to the NCAA tournament. And he did make one Final Four at Texas, but you're right, that evidence is kind of overwhelming me. I guess I should have focused on that sooner and not advised a betting buddy of mine who bets a lot. He says, Vols ? And I responded swiftly, definitely. I didn't share your opinion of Houston, and I watched Houston in the tournament. I really thought Tennessee would win that game. And why didn't it? I thought some of the post-game takes were curious. And you see this in the NCAA tournament a lot. When a team bows out, well, then people say, well, yeah, it's obvious why. They didn't have this, they didn't have that, they couldn't do this well. Well, they had the same weakness 3 games earlier when they blew out a team in the second round, or when they won their way into the Elite Eight. I mean, you look at Tennessee, it lost twice to Florida, got blown out in Gainesville, but I thought Florida was the best team in the country. And Tennessee beat it by 20 points in Knoxville. Tennessee just beat a Kentucky team that beat it twice during the regular season, and looked pretty good beating Kentucky in the Sweet 16. It beat Auburn. That's not easy to do in the SEC tournament. So you look at all that. So I didn't think Tennessee was burdened by all these weaknesses. I really thought in the opening moments when the game which proved crucial, Tennessee looked tentative. It looked tight. And I think Houston sensed that. Houston looked anything but those. And it took control of the game. And to its credit, never let go. There were a few faint attempts at a run, but not really. I just think so much has been made of Rick Barnes's record in the NCAA tournament. And so much has been made of Tennessee's failure to make the Final Four. I mean, you look at all the programs that have made the Final Four. Look in the SEC. South Carolina's made it.
Hmm.
Georgia's made it. Mississippi State's made it. And you think about the resources Tennessee has and some of the coaches it's had, some really good coaches. Why hasn't it ever made it? And I think the players pick up on that. And I know they weren't there for those other losses, but it was so important to them. You heard that in their comments, game by game, win after win. Yeah, we want to. These fans deserve this. Well, they might deserve it, but you didn't give it to them, and I think it doesn't help to make anything out bigger than it is. The Final Four, making the Final Four is a big enough deal anyway. But when you say this is history to be made, you just turn it to an epic event, and epic events come with expectations and they come with pressure. And I thought that showed with Tennessee.
Yeah, I thought the post game narrative was all too predictable for Tennessee, John, in that it decisively headed into two camps, which you could just see coming. You had the Barnes apologists, which did what they always do. They said, well, Tennessee lost to a better team. That's not Barnes's fault. And Tennessee didn't shoot well. That's not Barnes's fault. He wasn't the one out there missing all those threes. And that's the narrative that kind of comes out every year. On the other side of that, you had sort of the Barnes antagonist saying like, well, Rick Barnes stinks in the NCAA tournament. Of course they lost. I think, as is oftentimes the case, maybe the truth somewhere in the middle. Like from 2018 through 2023. Now, there's no tournament in 2020 during that stretch, but otherwise, from 2018 through 2023, I thought Rick Barnes consistently underachieved in the NCAA tournament with Tennessee. The past 2 years getting into the Elite Eight, I think those were appropriate achievements. I mean, last year they had a really, really good team with Dalton Knecht. They run into Zach Edey in the tournament, and I think that had nothing to do with Barnes. There was one team in that tournament last year that was beating Purdue, and that's a team that did beat him, UConn. Reaching the Elite Eight, I don't criticize Barnes for that at all. That was as far as they should have gone. With this team, I did not think throughout much of the season that this was an Elite Eight roster. I know they had some impressive victories. I know they were ranked number 1 in the nation for a while. As you mentioned, they beat Florida very decisively once. But when I just looked at this roster, I did not think this was an elite roster. I thought this was a good defensive team that could look elite if Chaz Lanier had a good shooting night. If he didn't have a good shooting night, they had a good defense and not much else. And so in the totality of the season, I thought getting to the Elite Eight was a good achievement. It's just viewed through the lens of his career, Barnes's career. This is another time in which he needed to spring that one upset to get to the Final Four, and it couldn't happen. So I think in several past years, he's underachieved in the tournament. I don't know with this particular team. I don't constitute this an underachievement. However, the traditional battle lines are kind of drawn. The Barnes apologists are going to blame it on the poor shooting and act like he has nothing to do with that. The Barnes detractors are going to say the guy stinks in the tournament, and that's just all there is to it. I think the reality is Rick Barnes is a great program builder. You're never going to be irrelevant with Rick Barnes, and also he's not a very good tournament coach. When you need to upset a team in the tournament, that's not the guy you want on your sidelines.
That's a fair appraisal, and I really thought Tennessee would make the Final Four. You can look at its roster and say, well, it lacks this or lacks that. It's maybe too dependent on Chaz Lanier shooting. And maybe I was too close to it because I watched it all season, and I thought this team was different perhaps from Barnes's other teams. There was a closeness about it. I thought the team played together really well. I thought the team played with a lot of confidence, and I thought it had the unique ability where different players, you could go to a game where somebody had an awful game, a key player, a starter has an awful game, and it would still find a way to win. I thought it was very resourceful. And that's kind of why I saw it beating Houston. Also, I watched Houston in the other tournament games. Houston barely got by Purdue. You mentioned Kelvin Sampson coming out with that play call there
Mm-hmm.
at the end. And yeah, that was good coaching. I would say no against last year, Purdue Elite Eight. No, that team went as far as it should have gone. It wasn't beating Zach Edey in Purdue, particularly the way the game was called.
Right.
And a lot of games were called that way with Purdue last year. However, this year I did think it underachieved because of the way it lost. To me, it just came out and delivered a clunker at this pinnacle moment when I thought this team had the capability in this situation to do what it's done before and to raise its game a little more when the stakes got even higher. And it didn't do that at all. Instead, it shrunk back. It watching those early moments, it didn't look to me like the same team. It looked unsure of itself. It couldn't get to the basket. Houston tightened up that defense. Forget the 3-point shooting. It just didn't seem to be able to make a play or to take Houston. Houston just looked more confident, more in control, and right away. And I really thought, and maybe that's just my mistake, as I pointed out, I make a lot of them, to believe that this is who Tennessee was. It was this team, resourceful team, that in the biggest moments on the biggest stage, it was going to do what other teams hadn't done. It was going to elevate its game. And it just the opposite proved true. I was really surprised at how that first half unfolded. I mean, I just never saw that coming.
Yeah, you used the right word to describe it, John. Clunker. I mean, that's a perfect description right there. If you're drawing up the hammerhead for the print newspaper, I mean that's all you need there.
Clunker.
At 100-point font, clunker. That's I don't even need to read anything beyond that. That pretty well summed it up. Well, we mentioned, John, we're hoping for the Final Four is not a clunker. You know my picks, so I sort of guess I betrayed the drama earlier in this episode when I revealed that I'm sticking to my pick of Houston beating Florida in the national championship. I want to flip it, John. I want to do something different here and not ignore what my eyes have told me. Duke looks like the best team in this tournament. Or even if I'm not picking Duke, maybe I should flip to Florida. But I'm sticking to my theory of I'm riding veteran guards in this tournament, and so ergo I like both Florida and Houston, and I just like Kelvin Sampson's coaching. I like that collection of veterans. I mean, they go. I mean, they're junior, senior, up and down the roster with guys that have played in this tournament before. So I'm sticking to it, even though I acknowledge that Duke is a worthy favorite, and even if Houston upsets Duke, I don't know. I'm almost tempted to flip to Florida in that game. I guess if I was ranking the teams most likely to least likely to win it all, I might have Auburn at the bottom of the list, John. But I mean, it's not like I'd give them a 5 or 7% chance. I mean, I would still give Auburn probably at least a 15% chance of winning the tournament at this point. I mean, heck, they're the number 1 overall seed. They looked really good against Michigan State, but somebody's got to be last on that list, right? And so if I was ranking, most likely to least likely to win it, I suppose I'd pick Auburn. But I mean, shoot, I can come up with a lot of narratives in which they win this thing.
Well, when we're talking for just fun, and we do that occasionally, you pointed out what a great motivator Bruce Pearl is and how he's got that underdog role. Going into the Final Four, Auburn's not by a lot. I mean, it's had a great year, and it was the overall number 1 seed. So it's hard to visualize that as an underdog. But in fact, when you look at these teams and you see what the betting lines are, Auburn looks like an underdog, and Bruce Pearl can thrive in that role. So you can make a case for all these different teams. It's worth pointing out that stubbornness is a recurring theme of this podcast. I mean, football season.
We'll change our picks, John, but sometimes we do dig in our heels on something.
Yeah, I can bring what's KJ Jefferson doing now? The former.
I don't know, but I know what he should be doing is playing his 17th season of college football for Arkansas.
Okay.
I want old KJ, my man, back at Arkansas.
Well, yeah, I can't
What
even.
was that guy, Max Johnson? I always forgot the
I,
name of the
you know
quarterback
what?
you loved.
I know it's
Transferred a
like,
couple times.
yeah, I thought he was going to lead two teams to a national championship, and you know what? I've really kind of blocked memory of him because I was getting ready to bring that up, and I said, was it Max or was it Matt? I don't even remember that guy anymore. So I've moved on. Uh, so it's hard for me to get away from Florida, even though when I look at these teams, I just think Duke's going to win it. But I keep my one reason for sticking with Florida is I've seen it twice in dire situations where I thought it's getting ready to go down. You were wrong again, and sure enough, you brought his name up earlier. Walter Clayton, he becomes a different player. It's almost like he's waiting, he's hanging back. Uh-oh, trouble on the horizon. That's your cue. And suddenly he becomes the player in this tournament. Cooper Flagg of Duke can probably do the same thing. And but I'll go with Florida. So we'll probably
Florida
both
over Duke, Florida over Houston.
Florida over Duke. I
Yeah.
think Duke will beat Houston.
Yeah.
Um,
One of my
but
favorite moments of this tournament, John, was when Walter Clayton, late in that Texas Tech game, could have shot a contested 12-footer in the paint. Instead,
uh-huh.
he just dribbles backwards about 12 feet and says, "Why shoot it from 12 feet when I could shoot it from 24?" Oh, by the way, it's worth an extra point out here. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll take the 3-pointer. I mean, yeah, I get all the analytics and stuff. Like, I know all that, but like, you don't often see a guy with a look in the paint who just says, nah, I'm going to head back here, take my extra point and shoot it twice as far from the basket. That was just a great a lasting moment, I thought, of the tournament, particularly if Florida
Oh,
wins the whole thing.
I agree. There was another player I can't remember. I watched some of his basketball, women's, men's. I saw another player do the same thing. But to me, that's a lesson learned. If you've got a player that plays the game as adeptly as Walter Clayton does, do the math. It's 2 points here, it's three there. So don't rule out a quick retreat to behind the line and then he launches one. But there's a tendency, it's as though, okay, you stopped his momentum, he's backing up. So won that battle. No. He's just getting ready to get an extra point. So, and he's that kind of player. Obviously, Cooper Flagg is too. I
Yeah.
mean, you feel like Cooper Flagg is just going to be as good as he needs to be. That this is now required for your team to win, and then he does it. So,
A lot of stars in this Final Four, 4 1 seeds for just the second time ever, 2 SEC teams. Prime opportunity here for the conference to get that elusive national championship. John, I've enjoyed talking hoops these last few weeks, but what do you say? Get back to football next week?
spring ball, there's just nothing like it, is it?
I can
Why they won't cancel that is beyond me, but they keep doing it.
I can sense your joy, but we'll muster up some enthusiasm for it next week. For now, enjoy the conclusion of the NCAA tournament. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.